Cuphead is, without a doubt, one of the hardest games I've ever played. Despite that, I always came back to it to play some more. There's just something about it that grabs me. It's got addicting yet challenging gameplay, catchy music, fantastic art direction, the list goes on. There's just so much to like about this game at its core, and now there's even more to dig into with the new DLC, fittingly titled The Delicious Last Course. It introduces a brand new character, Miss Chalice, as well as a new location with new challenges, bosses, and abilities to use. And after playing for about 10 hours, it's clear that this expansion offers more of what I enjoyed so much in the original game. And although I haven't fully completed it yet, I want to share my thoughts on my experience so far. So, how is The Delicious Last Course so far? Well, let's find out. Accessing the DLC is thankfully very easy. For those who might be playing for the first time, all you need to do is finish the first mausoleum level on the first aisle, and then you'll find a man with a boat that'll take you to the new location, Inkwell Isle 4. Starting up a beautiful cutscene where it's explained that Chalice has been trying to escape the astral plane for ages, but thanks to a cookie baked by Chef Saltbaker, she can swap places with either Cuphead or Mugman to come back to life. However, the effect is only temporary. Luckily, the chef says that he has a new recipe for a Wonder Tart, which will be so good that it'll give Chalice complete control over the astral plane, bringing her back to life for good. Only problem is that the ingredients are held by powerful foes that reside on Inkwell Isle 4. Thus begins Cuphead, Mugman, and Chalice's quest to collect all of the ingredients to make the Wonder Tart. The process of collecting these ingredients isn't as easy as it might sound though. In a similar way that you collected soul contracts for the devil, you'll be traveling around Inkwell Isle 4 facing tough bosses that'll test your skills and patience. The bosses are extremely well designed and really blew me away in terms of creativity. You'll fight a large hairy giant, a gang of bugs, and an anthropomorphic cow residing in a saloon, just to name a few. There's so much creativity with the new designs and they are all animated wonderfully. For example, one of my favorite bosses, the aforementioned cow inside of the saloon, goes from shooting projectiles at you to pulling out a vacuum and sucking up the entire building as she transitions to her next phase. Another great example is the hairy giant that, in its third phase, eats your character, taking you to a stomach where you have to survive while jumping between bone platforms surrounded by stomach acid. The bosses are as visually pleasing as they are tough. This is the type of game where the first time you attempt to fight a boss, you're probably going to fail due to the sheer amount of things happening on the screen at once, but each time you'll learn something new about the boss, and as you continue applying what you've learned, you can overcome what felt like an impossible challenge, and this is an extremely rewarding feeling. Outside of the difficulty of the bosses, what I also found really cool was that while walking around the aisle, you'll sometimes come across a rope ladder with a title called The King's Leap, which will take you to a massive castle where you can complete challenges that aren't as hard as the boss levels, as they're more about platforming instead of taking down a huge boss, and they don't last nearly as long. These challenges focus on the parry mechanic and don't allow you to use your finger guns, so you have to rely on movement to get through them. But I felt that it was a great way to break up the game so you're not just fighting bosses one after another, because in my case, dying over and over to the same boss can be a little disheartening. Completing these challenges rewards you with a few coins that you can spend at Pork Rind's shop, where you can get your hands on new weapons, abilities, and a mysterious item not found on the other aisles, which adds more variety to the game. My favorite weapon so far is the Twist Up, which shoots tiny tornadoes in an upward curved path ahead of you, which is great for hitting enemies that stick to the top of the screen very often. It's also worth mentioning that you can bring these new abilities to the previous Inkwell Isle maps, meaning if you were stuck on a boss before, you might have a better chance beating them this time around. I also want to briefly touch on the music because it was a massive positive in the base game, and I'm happy to say that the music featured in the DLC is just as great. My favorite so far has to be the hectic track that plays while you fight the hairy giant. It's so fast paced and intense and perfectly matched my heart rate as I died over and over. But it's hard to stay mad at the game when the music is this great. I also really like the somewhat chill Inkwell Isle 4 music, which kinda fits the fact that it's your downtime in between levels. Overall, I have nothing but positive things to say about the new music in this DLC. There's a good amount of new stuff to check out, but out of all the things this DLC has to offer, I think Chalice is the most impressive aspect. Not only does she provide a palate cleanser in terms of the character you play as, but she also brings new movement mechanics that can help her get around much better than Cuphead or Mugman. First up is her double jump, which already gives her much more mobility in the air. And then there's her parry dash, and this is a great ability. Being able to not worry about lining up your jumps to land on pink objects was something I instantly fell in love with. I found it most useful on bosses where pink objects come towards you from the sides of the screen. You can also use this parry dash after a double jump, which is great for getting around enemies or traps on the ground. Last up is her dodge roll, which adds a bit of invincibility and is great for evading objects or passing through smaller enemies. For bigger bosses, however, jumping over them is still the best option, since her dash doesn't take her extremely far, and that invincibility will wear off while you're still in contact with them. She also has a unique super art, Spiral Pillar, which is a massive vertical beam that deals damage to enemies directly under or over you. It can't be understated how great it feels to have access to all of these new moves. In my opinion, Chalice is a way for people who aren't as good at these kinds of games, like me, to have an easier time progressing while being able to collect contracts or, in the case of the DLC, ingredients, which is something that the simple mode doesn't allow you to do. That being said, I wouldn't say playing as Chalice means you win by default, as using her requires you to equip the Astro Cookie, which functions as a charm. So while you can take advantage of her new abilities, you lose the option to equip charms such as the Smoke Bomb or the Heart. There's also the fact that the game is still pretty tough while playing as her. Her abilities feel more like tools that allow you to play the game a little differently, and while I find it a bit easier, it's not a free pass. I've still found myself stuck on bosses for hours on end. That's also thanks to the fact that the DLC continues the trend of heart racing, high energy bosses. This DLC is very hard and still requires you to pay attention to the smallest details in order to finish these levels. However, compared to the base game, I wouldn't say that the DLC is harder, mainly because the difficulty comes from having to learn the patterns of these bosses, but once you get that down, the difficulty feels largely the same. I was able to run through a boss that originally took me upwards of 2 hours to beat the first time. However, no matter how frustrating the game may get, or how long I spend dying to the same boss, that satisfaction I feel after hearing is immense. It makes it all worth it in the end. I've always loved Cuphead for many reasons: its frantic gameplay, the visual style, that catchy music, and the awesome boss designs. It's a great game at its core, and I'm happy to say that the delicious last course absolutely succeeds in adding more content to an already fantastic game. So for now, I'm really liking Cuphead the Delicious Last Course a lot. If you've been eyeing Cuphead for a while, or maybe you started playing and never finished, now is a great time to jump back into the action thanks to the addition of Chalice as well as the new weapons. Borrowing from my previous statement, she's just a perfect addition to the game, and I think people who found the game a little too hard will enjoy trying her out and playing the game with a different experience. But that's going to do it for my impressions of Cuphead the Delicious Last Course. Thank you to Studio MDHR for crafting such a beautiful game for us to check out, and thank you all for watching this video. Make sure you subscribe to GameXplain and ring the bell for a lot more on Cuphead and other things gaming too. Until next time.
Using recipes to get necessities for the delicious last course. With the wicked